Hello and welcome to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the radical Majid Nawaz. And today's topic is on the Iran war. Of course, the topic entitled Iran replies to Israeli strikes by attacking Sunni Muslim Arabs and the UK. That is right. Of course, many of you would have seen the news over the course of this week. Iran was attacked by the United States of America and Israel primarily, though the United States of America joined them. It is said joined them because the attacks were coming anyway. But despite that and regardless, Iran's decision was in retaliation. Its decision was to target its neighboring Sunni Muslim Arab countries, the GCC Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, even Iraq and Syria, and the UK. And so the real question now is what happens next. Iran's attempts to broaden the conflict are clearly clear and present, facing everybody concerned with this conflict. And the rest of this stream is going to break down precisely what happened and why the mainstream Western anti-war left are completely misdiagnosing the problem and are acting as apologists and a front for Iranian regional colonialism and aggression against its neighbors, the Sunni Muslim Arabs, who, according to the mainstream Western anti-war left movement, have no right to self-defense, nor do they exercise their own agency, because according to the anti-war Western leftist movement, the world can easily be explained by their childlike reductive analysis that everything revolves around Israel. Everything begins with Israel and everything ends with Israel. And even when Sunni Muslim Arabs are attacked by Iran, if they respond to defend themselves, that's somehow them acting as agents for Israel, because the diseased, rotted brain of the Western anti-war left in the mainstream who are vocal on this topic, of course, not everybody should be cast in the same light, but those who we're referring to here, their diseased, rotted brain cannot conceive of any action taking place in the Middle East without attributing it only to the lens that this is somehow Israel versus everybody else, as if Sunni Muslim Arabs, brown people, cannot think for themselves and have no independent agency, even after they've been attacked. The truth is, the world is a lot more complex than the simplistic, childlike, reductive, driven by ego and perhaps even anti-Semitic hatred of the vocal mainstream anti-war left, who excuse and justify every act of war against brown people if perpetrated by theocracies such as the Iranian theocracy, and yet are up in arms if those same Sunni Muslims are attacked by Israel. This duplicitous double standard is based on a poverty of expectation that brown Sunni Muslim Arabs are incapable of taking offense after being struck by missiles, have no right to self-defense, and possess no independent agency. The rest of the stream will be dedicated to unpacking everything you've just heard. Stay with us. You're listening to Warrior Creed with me, the radical Majid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Welcome back to the Warrior Creed live stream. And as you heard off the top of the hour, the topic today, Iran replies to Israeli strikes by attacking Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors and the UK. Now, yes, by the way, I'm aware that the sound levels are off, that the music is very loud when we play the introductory titles. It is an issue, but it takes time and money to remix things, and that's simply a luxury that we don't often have. So for the meanwhile, just accept the fact that maybe you need to turn the volume down and up again. It's not too much of an inconvenience. Now to the topic at hand. It's not the first time that people have raised that, so it's something which has been a constant issue. So we thought we'd get that one out the way quickly. Here is the graphic, the cartoon for today. And it really is, we felt, out of all the selections of the various cartoons that we could have shown you to kick the show off with today, this one is perhaps the most poignant because it depicts a very clearly reluctant President Trump about to jump into the war pool, where the swimmers already in the war pool are the Iranians and the Israelis. And Trump there with his pink float, appearing reluctant to dive in, but poised to do so regardless, is pretty fair description of what's happened. And let's begin with that cartoon, because this conflict didn't begin yesterday. It certainly didn't begin this week in any sense. This is a very old conflict and involves more than the two players in that cartoon, the Iranians and the Israelis. This is a multilateral conflict in the Middle East, a very complex, multi-layered and multilateral conflict with roots back to the absence of Sunni Muslim leadership due to the destruction of the Ottoman Empire in 1924, the last legitimate caliphate for Sunni Muslims. That left a big vacuum. Into that vacuum came the multiplicity of Sunni Muslim Arab states that you see in the region today. But the void essentially in the region, in terms of a great power, was filled by Israel and Iran, the two powers, not just Israel. And this is what we're going to unpack over the course of this stream for you all today, because the childlike and simplistic analysis of the Western mainstream anti-war left, the regressive left, wishes to posit that all conflict in the Middle East is caused only by Israel. This is a lie. It is a half-truth at best. Israel under Netanyahu and the Likudnik Zionist leadership are indeed interested in sparking conflict and war, because by using the dialectic of conflict, they seek the opportunity to expand their influence, as they did in Gaza, with the clear stand down order on the October the 7th and the subsequent exploitation of that conflict by Netanyahu, to the point where Israel's own security services and those Israeli forces that served at the Gaza border on the night testified in the Knesset that this was effectively a stand down order given to us, and they expressed their bewilderment at the behavior of their political leadership. Now, our regulars would have lived through all of that period with us here on Radical Media, would have heard and seen us present receipts demonstrating that the Likudnik Zionists were interested in inciting the dialectic of conflict for problem, reaction, solution, so that they could exploit that conflict and further expand their influence. And what happened in Gaza is a clear template for that approach. And that is to use war to then conquer territory. And that's effectively what Netanyahu's Likudnik Zionists did in Gaza. Now, the half-truth, or the lie, peddled by the Western anti-war regressive left, is that Israel under the Likudnik Zionists is the only country in the region engaged in such behavior. The truth is that because the Middle East is a multipolar, complex region, there is more than one actor at play. The Iranian theocracy, which, by the way, having witnessed inside Arab jails personally, the Iranian theocracy's support for the Alawite Assad dynasty in Syria and what they got up to in their prisons against dissidents trumps and is far worse than you could possibly imagine than anything that is alleged that the Israelis do to Palestinians inside their jails. The privilege, luxury of being a Western regressive leftist who thinks they're anti-war is that they often never have to see the inside of Arab prisons, though, of course, some of them may have seen the inside of Israeli jails because they jump on these flotillas and think they're changing the world by sailing over to various blockades in an attempt to liberate Palestine. But if you truly want to divorce your white savior colonial complex for a second and understand something, that what goes on inside the Arab prisons and how they treat dissidents is worse by order of magnitudes that you could possibly not imagine ever than anything you've read about what happens in Israeli jails. Take that from somebody that's been inside Arab prisons and dragged through their torture cells. The Iranians were for a long time sponsoring the Alawite sectarian. By the way, Alawite is a sect, a minority sect within the Shiite sect, which is a minority sect of Islam. It is a minority sect within a minority sect. The majority of Syria, overwhelmingly so, are Sunni Muslim Arabs. And the Iranian theocracy, for decades, supported a generational tyranny inside Syria. And what they did inside their prisons is the stuff of nightmares. And so it's important to remember for the privileged Western regressive left class, so-called anti-war, their privilege blinds them from understanding the other actors and the other players in the conflict in the Middle East. And yes, there's many Western-born Muslims, such as rappers and others, who have jumped on this anti-war bandwagon. But frankly, they're just as privileged. Those rappers that come from, yes, fair enough, socially deprived areas of the West still have absolutely no understanding of what happens in the Arab world. They are entirely, including their genre of music, rap, products of the West. And yet the Western regressive left think it's somehow more authentic to listen to their voices than the voices of the Sunni Muslims themselves who have hailed from those prisons. Now, anyone who's a regular on the Warrior Creed live stream would have remembered the time when Syria under Assad changed hands. Assad, the dictator, fled to Moscow, his patrons in Russia, and of course the Iranian theocracy. And those prisons in Syria were liberated. And you will remember our reaction at the time, celebrating the liberation of those prisoners because of the fact that we are very well aware what happens inside those Arab prisons. The voices that the Western anti-war regressive left supports, even, albeit be they Western Muslim voices, have absolutely no idea what happens inside those jails and should actually just be quiet and listen to those people from those countries, such as Syrians, about the way in which the Iranian theocracy treated them, not just under Bashar al-Assad, but under his father to Hafiz al-Assad, and the way in which, for our entire lifetimes, those tyrannies have been propped up by the Iranian theocracy. So Iran and its regional colonial aggression in the Sunni Muslim Arab world is another player in the regional conflict. Now, there are two players in the area that are ideologically driven to want war, not just one player. And this is where the Western regressive left should be quiet and listen very carefully. The two players that are ideologically driven, not circumstantially driven, such as what's about to happen if Saudi Arabia responds to the Iranian attacks, that's a circumstantial response. The Saudis were attacked. They have the right to self-defense. Ideologically driven for war is a different thing altogether. Now, of course, we agree on, we meaning Sunni Muslims who have spent time and lived in the prisons of the area in the Middle East, and the Western regressive left, so-called anti-war, we agree on the fact that the Likud Zionists and Israel currently under their leadership, led by Netanyahu, are ideologically driven for conflict. That part we agree on. Where we disagree, and where the Western regressive left should frankly shut up, is that the Iranian theocracy is also ideologically driven for war in the region. They are an ideologically driven power, such as the Likudnik Zionists. Their ideology instead is Shiite Islamism, not Likudnik Zionism. And Shiite Islamism believes in the supremacy of all Islamism, that is to say, synchronizing law with any one given reading of Islam. That is Islamism per se. So not only does Shiite Islamism believe in Islamism, which is already supremacist, but it is on top of that sectarian because it's Shiite Islamism. So it believes in the supremacy of Shiites to govern any Islamist ideological entities that they go about creating in the region. And that's what they did in Syria. They artificially propped up the Alawite dynasty, not because they were Islamists. That would have been bad enough. They weren't, in fact. They were Baathists, which, by the way, Arab socialists, isn't too distant to Islamists, even though it sounds quite different, because all modern-day Islamism is, in fact, the bastard child of Baathism or Arab socialism, which in itself, Arab socialism or Baathism, is the bastard child of European fascism and Nazism. Arab socialism is national socialism in the Arab context. From there came Islamism. Now, what the Shiite Islamists in the Iranian theocracy were doing is that they were artificially propping up the Shiite Alawite dynasty in Syria in order to keep the Syrian Arab Sunni Muslim population under their grip. So Shiite Islamism isn't just ideologically driven for conflict and war, it is also sectarian on top of it. And so that completes the point. There are two countries in the Middle East that are ideologically driven for war. Not Israel per se, but Israel under the Likudnik Zionists led by Netanyahu. And, of course, not Shia people per se, but also, of course, Iran, that is currently positing itself as the leader of the Shiite people when it's not, because instead it's a Shiite Islamist theocracy. The Shiite Islamist theocracy in Iran is ideologically interested in furthering the dialectic of conflict. And this is where the idiotic and frankly white savior complex ridden, privileged Western regressive left fail to understand the region and deign to lecture and preach at and gaslight Sunni Muslims from the region by telling Sunni Muslims who've just been attacked by Iran that if they defend themselves, they're somehow doing Israel's bidding. Be quiet. Simply shut up. Seriously. You have absolutely no understanding of the region. You joined conversations on the region yesterday when this conflict doesn't just trace all the way back to 1979 when Khomeini came to power, because that was the invention of Shiite Islamism. But the problem began not with Shiite Islamism, the problem began with Islamism per se. And that traces back even prior to the creation of the Iranian theocracy. It goes all the way back, not just to the 1979 and Khomeini's Velayat al-Faqih, innovation and heresy. That's his theory of governance, Velayat al-Faqih, that claims you can rule in God's name, when in fact Shiite orthodoxy absolutely prohibits ruling in God's name. And that was the very change or the heresy that Khomeini brought about in 1979. It's not Orthodox Shiite religion. So that's Shiite Islamism. But the problem began even before that, in 1953, when my former organization, Hizb ut-Tahrir, was founded in Jerusalem as a Sunni Islamist organization. And even before that, all the way back, in fact, to 1928, when the Muslim Brotherhood was founded. Islamism, the ideology that seeks to impose any one given version of Islam over all of society, is an ideology that is totalitarian and borrows its fascism from Baathism or Arab socialism, from where it was born. And Arab socialism, as we've already said, is national socialism in the Arab context. They lifted it from European fascism. Is it at all surprising to you that those vocal on the Western regressive left in defending the heirs of National Socialism in the Middle East, or the heirs of Baathism in the Middle East, who are the Islamists, is it any wonder that they also happen to be, in the Western context, increasingly resembling National Socialists? And then you begin to realize what's going on. This is a replay of the rise of European fascism in an attempt to defend its last surviving bastions in the Middle East, and that is the Iranian theocracy being one of them. Of course, the Assad dynasty were also one of those last surviving bastions, and thankfully they've recently fallen, and the Syrian Sunni Muslim Arab peoples have been liberated and are now governed by a system that is more in line with their own traditions and beliefs, which is how it should be. If there's anything that replaces the theocracy in Iran, it should be a system that resembles the people of Iran, the Persians, and their traditions and their beliefs, which includes Islam, by the way, but it does not include Islamism, which is a modern-day heresy invented in Iran in 1979, but before that in the Sunni world, going through Hizb ut-Tahrir into Jamaat Islami in the Indian subcontinent, and of course the Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt. These are all modern heresies that are not authentic nor traditional to Islam and Muslims. So those are the two parties. In the cartoon, you can see it there, the Iranians and the Israelis in the war pool. It's not just the Likud Zionists that are seeking war, but also the Iranian theocrats as well. And the image of President Trump on the top there, about to jump in, is because he's reluctant. It is clear that the Americans have been reluctant, as evidenced by the many false starts to this conflict. The fact that we already had that 10-day or 12-day, whichever one, war that occurred between Iran and Israel, and the Americans did not join in. The reluctance was very clear. And yet finally, Trump, as is in this cartoon, jumps into the war pool. And that is, of course, what we're going to explain in the rest of this stream. That cartoon, by the way, by Thiago Lucas. Thank you very much for that. And there, the title again, just to make it very clear what we're talking about today. Iran replies to Israeli strikes by attacking Sunni Muslim Arabs and the UK. That is a statement of facts. That's what happened. Israel struck Iran. Iran decided to strike back. Of course, you'd expect them to strike back at Israel. They also decided to strike back at the Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors and the UK. And that changes, it should at least change, the tone of the conversation for everyone from there on in. Of course, it's a very major inconvenient fact for the privileged white savior Western regressive left, because now, of course, the conversation about what the Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors should do and whether they have the right to defend themselves upsets the childlike dichotomy of the white savior complex regressive left, who try to posit every problem in the Middle East as being one about Israel versus everyone else. No, it's not. You absolute imbeciles. Pakistan is right now bombing the Taliban in Afghanistan. That has got very little to do with Israel. What happened is that the Taliban, the Islamist, Sunni Islamist theocracy of the Taliban, before anybody accuses us of being sectarian, no, it's theocracies that are sectarian. By definition, we are anti-sectarian. A theocracy in Afghanistan and a theocracy in Iran are the ones causing the sectarianism because they're ruling in the name of religion. Stop gaslighting us with your white savior complex. The theocracy in Afghanistan decided to attack Pakistan, not only with terrorist proxies inside Pakistan, but also by joining up with that other supremacist, this time not a Muslim, in India. Modi and his Hindutva supremacists cut a deal with the Taliban, not just for trade, but also with regards to Kashmir. And the Afghanistan theocrats, the Taliban, decided to recognize Modi's claim over Kashmir, a matter which for Pakistan is a red line. So the Pakistani government decided to teach the upstarts in the Taliban a lesson by bombing them back. Now, that's a problem between the theocrats in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. There is no Israel in that equation. And so, again, demonstrating that the world is a lot more complex than this childlike, reductive approach that the Western regressive left takes. And the Middle East is currently demonstrating that in a manner that is incredibly inconvenient for the Western regressive left. So let's move, first of all, to the statement, our initial immediate statement that we made when this conflict first started. And we're just gonna read it for you so that we get an understanding as to where we began on this when the conflict first sparked. Radical media statement on Iran war. So first point, all war is undesirable and should only ever be a last resort. Okay, these words speak for themselves. We are not pro-war, we are anti-war, but we're not pacifists. All right? There is such a thing as a just war. There is such a thing as self-defense. And if somebody slaps you, we don't turn the other cheek. Just to make that very clear off the bat. So, point one, yes, all war is undesirable and should only ever be a last resort. But point two, military strikes are also undesirable, but they're not the same thing as all-out war. So keep that in mind. Military strikes are not the same thing as a total declaration of war. That is also the case in international diplomacy. So what we're witnessing right now are Israeli and American strikes on Israel, on Iran, and Iranian retaliatory strikes on people that had nothing to do with those strikes, the Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors and the UK, are based in Cyprus. But those strikes, regardless, are not the same thing as all-out war. Point three, all-out World War III remains highly unlikely. We stand by that, even though this statement was put out on the first night of these strikes. We stand by the statement. It holds till today. All-out World War III remains highly unlikely. One of the key points there to demonstrate that is Russia and China condemned the Israeli and American strikes at the UN, but they stopped short of offering any material support to the Iranian theocracy, just as they did when it came to the fall of Assad in Syria. All-out World War III, take it from us here at Radical Media, remains highly unlikely. Point four, important. Sorry, fasting as well while trying to get through this means no drinking water. And so it's a bit harder, but we'll get through it. Number four, this ongoing conflict didn't just start last night. The joint Israeli-US strikes on Iran and Iran's own strikes against regional Sunni Arab countries will last a specified duration, but it's difficult to conceive how they cause regime collapse inside Iran on their own. Again, that point's holding up. So this statement was from the first night of the strikes. So how many days in we are now? It's holding up. The regime has not collapsed, despite the fact their leadership has been decapitated. Khamenei is dead. His top leadership are also dead, but the regime stands and it will remain standing. It's unlikely it will collapse. So point four is holding up. Point five, once these strikes subside, it is highly unlikely that the US or Israel will commit boots on the ground to bring about regime change inside Iran. That, we believe, remains the case. It's highly unlikely that the US or Israel will commit boots on the ground. Point six, after these strikes are over, the people of Iran themselves will be responsible for removing the regime that rules over them if they so desire. That point stands too. The brave resistors of the Iranian theocracy from all denominations, it's not just Iranian expat atheists. It includes, of course, Shiite Muslims that subscribe to the non-Islamist version of their faith, followers of Sistani in Iraq. They are non-Islamist Shiites. They do not subscribe to the Iranian Shiite Islamist theocracy. So it's up to all opponents of the Iranian theocracy to take matters into their own hands after these strikes subside. Point seven, the Iranian people may succeed if figures senior enough inside the Iranian military change sides and abandon the supreme leader, or the now former supreme leader, Khamenei. This statement was written before he was confirmed dead. This happened to Assad inside Syria and to Maduro inside Venezuela. That may already be the plan. So not only does it need or require opponents to resist the Iranian theocracy in terms of the people and popular resistance, But that's never enough. It also requires, as happened throughout the Arab Spring example, it also requires factions senior enough that hold enough power within the regime to switch sides and join the people and remove those that were in power before them. Without those factions inside the Iranian military switching sides, the regime has no chance of changing. So that's a key factor. That's a key condition that needs to happen. Point 8, without exercising this plan, the Iranian people are unlikely to succeed in changing their own regime. In other words, without point 7 happening, without key factions within the military switching sides, as happened in Venezuela, as happened in Syria, without that happening in Iran, no amount of brave resistance by the Iranian people will remove their regime. Point 9. War is diplomacy through other means. Peace is the absence of the practicality of war. These strikes will eventually subside. Peace will then either be achieved with a new power inside Iran or an exhausted Iranian regime that accepts US terms. It is highly unlikely that there will be all-out World War III. We await the opportunity for peace and reassert the need for a grand regional settlement for peace in the shape of a renewed Accords, named after Cyrus, be they, or Abraham. So the Cyrus Accords, the Abraham Accords, of course, being the peace accords between Sunni Muslim Arabs in Israel, the Cyrus Accords being those touted in any future Iranian regime between Iran and Israel. Peace is a good thing, but for peace to be achieved, certain obstacles need to be removed. Now, Trump's Gaza peace board has everybody on it except Iran. And that sets the scene for you. You've got Sunni Muslim nuclear power, the world's only Muslim nuclear power, Pakistan, on Trump's peace board. You've got the Hamas themselves signed up. Listen to this very carefully, privileged Western left, with your white savior complex and your so-called anti-war rhetoric. Hamas signed up to being anti-war and joined Trump's Gaza peace board, along with Saudi Arabia, Muslim country last time I checked, Pakistan, Muslim nuclear power last time I checked, Turkey, Muslim member of NATO last time I checked, Indonesia, Muslim world's most populous Sunni Muslim country last time I checked, and many more. They all signed up to Trump's Gaza peace board, including, by the way, belatedly and through immense pressure. And only roughly 2 weeks ago, Netanyahu signed up to Trump's Gaza peace board. The only country that didn't was the Iranian theocracy. So to the Western regressive left with their white savior complex and their privilege and their so-called anti-war stance, who are you to contradict something that even Hamas has agreed to? Who are you to tell the people of the region how to determine their region better than Hamas, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, all of these countries that have signed up to Trump's Gaza peace board and have said the solution is peace, not war. The theocrats in Tehran, they want the solution to be war. They want, in fact, to expand this war, which is why they threw all those missiles, those drone attacks on all of their neighbors, because they want to expand the theater of conflict. They want war. They don't want peace. Go figure if you claim yourself to be anti-war somehow. Point 10. Regardless, the Iranian regime is a sectarian Shiite Islamist theocracy that was invented by Khomeini in 1979 using his theory of Vilayat al-Faqih, or guardianship of the jurists. Shia Islamism, as invented by Khomeini, has no legitimacy in traditional Orthodox Shia religion, which prohibits ruling in God's name. For all except, that's it, prohibits ruling in God's name for all except the awaited Messiah, who in Sunni eschatology is the return of Jesus Christ, who the Shia also believe. But the Messiah, or the Imam Mahdi, they are in Shiite context specifically, they call the 12th Imam. And the 12th Imam is missing and they're waiting for the return of this 12th Imam, only that missing 12th Imam has the right to rule in God's name in Orthodox Shiite doctrine. So Khomeini came along in 1979 with his Vilayat al-Faqih concept, which means guardianship of the jurists. And the heresy that he invented was that, okay, we, the jurists, the clerics, yeah, the mullahs, we can rule in God's name while we're waiting for this Messiah. That is not Orthodox Shiite religion. Orthodox Shiite religion makes it very clear that you cannot rule in God's name. Only the Messiah can. That's why the Iranian Revolution, it came about in 1979, not 1400 years ago with the advent of Islam, because it's a modern heresy, just like all Islamism is. We conclude with the words we said there in our initial statement. It is good for humanity when theocracies fall, and we stand by that. The hypocrisy of the white savior complex Western regressive left who call themselves anti-war is they will not tolerate theocracies in their own lands and for their own selves in their own homes, and they absolutely abhor any sense of a Christian theocracy being created in their lands. Just go and read Handmaid's Tale. And yet, for some reason, hail theocracies in Muslim lands as the bastion of resistance against colonialism. No, tyranny, totalitarian states are colonial by definition. They are not the resistance to colonialism. They are themselves the colonial power that is leeching on the region. That's what totalitarian entities do. And theocracies aren't just totalitarian, but they're, as we've said earlier, they are sectarian on top of it. And that's what we're dealing with, a sectarian Shiite theocracy that is gaslighting everybody else in the region by complaining of sectarianism when we point out their sectarian theocratic tendencies. It is not sectarian to complain about a sectarian theocracy. Theocracies are sectarian by definition, and to complain about them, to resist them, and to oppose them is not sectarian. It is, in fact, opposing sectarianism. But the Western regressive left, true to their form, have returned to their gaslighting. Now that is no longer Israel is the topic of conversation, now that we are no longer talking about the Likudnik Zionist aggression in the region, suddenly they've returned to their gaslighting and their defense of theocracies by telling us that somehow we should want to be ruled by tyrannies in Sunni Muslim lands. As I said earlier, shut up. Simple as that. You have absolutely no right to speak on this topic. None whatsoever. And your right will not be respected. You will be told simply to shut up. That's how this goes from here on in. You are defenders of tyranny and theocracy. Shut up. Now, the Iranians responded to the death of their theocrat leader in the following way. We're just going to play the clip for you here.
روح بلند پیشوای ملت بزرگ ایران و پیشقراول امت اسلامی حضرت امام خامنه ای با نوشیدن شهد گوارای شهادت در ماه مبارک رمضان به ملکوت اعلا پیوست. شورای عالی امنیت ملی در این زمینه بیانیه‌ای به این شهر صادر کرده است.
Now, you can see a very distraught Iranian newscaster. They're reading and confirming the death of Khamenei, the supreme Ayatollah in Iran. They then subsequently went about to declare a jihad and told all Muslims to rally behind them against the great Satan that is America and Israel. That call, we can assure you, will fall flat. Sunni Muslims, the overwhelming majority of Muslims on the planet, over 80%, will not be responding anytime soon to a call for jihad by the Shiite Islamist theocracy, especially after Syria and what they did in Syria. Now, we responded then, of course, once it was confirmed that Khamenei was dead, with the following: ding dong, it's done. There remains much to do, but this will not end up like Iraq. It's more akin to a Venezuela moment. A decapitation with second-line regime people remaining as a compromise with them, which also avoids chaos, in order to eventually agree President Trump's terms for peace. But there remains much to do. So that's our reaction. Of course, there does remain much to do just because of the theocrats leader is dead. It doesn't mean that the conflict is resolved in any way. And this was our reaction immediately on GB News America during the first night of the strikes and our analysis.
Delighted to say now, though, the expert on this topic, political activist and journalist Majid Nawaz. Majid, thank you so much for giving us your time this evening on what will no doubt turn out to be a historic day. Majid, your assessment of events of today and what does this mean now going forward? I know it's a broad question, but I want to bring to this your own expertise and insight.
Well, thank you, Bev. And I want to also, first of all, begin by expressing my condolences to all those who have fallen victim to these strikes. It's never the intention of any action that is ever taken to target anything other than military targets. But of course, sometimes the inevitable occurs in war. So there are some victims that we should consider. Now, to the question, I think that what's going on here is historic. I think we're in a moment, as I confer with many of your previous guests, we're in a moment that is truly historic. We could well be seeing the end of not necessarily the Iranian theocracy, though possibly, but certainly the end of the current incarnation of it. And what I mean by that is, of course, as happened in Venezuela, with Maduro, and as happened in Syria with Assad, the way President Trump operates is he doesn't make moves such as this without previously having struck a deal with people on the inside. If we have learned anything about President Trump when it comes to military action, he's not a neocon warmonger, but neither is he a hippie with flowers in his mouth, Bev. The man believes in strategic interventions. If you remember the mother of all bombs that he dropped in Afghanistan, if you remember the limited US strikes in Syria to destroy and obliterate the ISIS leadership under President Trump. The man believes in strategic interventions, and the strategic intervention in Venezuela, in the taking of Maduro captive, is another recent example of that. What happened in Syria is a more opaque version of the same thing. A deal was struck, the Russian Navy withdrew and abandoned Assad, and Syria exchanged hands from the Iranian theocratic and Russian sphere of influence into the NATO sphere of influence. So, with all of that said, Bev, I think that that's precisely, to say that President Trump works with that kind of strategy, that's precisely what's happening here. Of course it's bad, of course there are victims, and we feel terrible for anyone that loses their life in war, and that includes those that Iran randomly decided to attack after this, and that it includes all of those Sunni Arab Muslim Gulf countries that the Iranians, for some reason, have decided are legitimate targets. Of course, they struck cities that didn't have US military bases, so that excuse doesn't stand up when it comes to what they did in the Sunni world, and we condemn that action entirely. So back to what President Trump may well be up to here. If a deal was struck, now, what could be going on is that with the death of Khomeini, as appears to be the case, is confirmed, and we've just heard it from yourself as well, the president confirmed it. If we enter into a post-Khomeini Iran, then a deal, as happened in Syria and Venezuela, could have been made, for example, with the first Vice President Arif, to take the position, the regime stays intact, as happened in Venezuela, as happened in other areas of strategic intervention like Afghanistan with the Moab. The regime stays intact, but the tone of that regime is renewed by the leader that replaces it. So as with Venezuela, they started opening business ties with the US, it could well be that the first Vice President Arif comes to terms with Israel and with the United States on whatever it was that they couldn't agree on in these peace negotiations. And all of this, Trump would have known prior to action, because he does not believe in all-out war. And the last thing I'll say, Bev, I know I've spoken a lot here, forgive me. I do not think, do not believe the black pillars, do not think that we're going to enter World War III. That's not going to happen. We are not about to enter Armageddon, nor the end of the world. There are plans in place for moments like this. And I believe what we're witnessing is the execution of such plans. What we could end up with on the other side of this is a regime that comes to terms with the demands of the US president in terms of nuclear non-proliferation. And we end up with a grand regional settlement, because the only obstacle to this was this regime. The Saudis themselves have now come to that as well and have declared all support to the US efforts, including war if necessary, because of Iran's absolutely absurd reaction after the strike. So that's, I think, a fair summary of what, in our view, is going on.
You've been saying for, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least a year now that you think you were looking at a grand regional settlement. You think the Middle East is about to enter a period of prolonged peace, the likes of which we've probably not seen. Well, I've not seen, we've not seen in our lifetime. Is that looking more likely or less likely tonight, Majid?
Well, I'm going to say something counterintuitive, but you probably could predict my answer, Bev. I think it's looking more likely. And the reasons for that is that one of the unintended consequences of Iran's calculated escalation, Iran deliberately escalated by attacking Sunni Muslim Arab Gulf countries who were not involved. Saudi Arabia had prohibited the US from using its air bases prior to this attack, which is why they're so upset with what Iran did. So their calculated escalation was done in order to drag everybody else into the war, because when they're fighting for their existential existence, it suits them to have as many parties for and against them in the war, because if you broaden the conflict, Russia gets involved, Iran has more supporters and therefore more chance of surviving. So that's what they tried to do. What's happened instead is, because of the Pakistani, Saudi, Turkey joint military defense pact, when Saudi has said now that it would support the US in any war effort necessary because they're so upset with what Iran literally bombed them, right? So Saudi has said to America, we will support you by any means necessary. That drags in nuclear Pakistan because of the defense pact they signed about 6 months ago. Now, when you end up with that kind of escalation, that Iran, I think, miscalculated here, the only option left, and they are logical people, Persians can be very logical, right? The only option left does mean come to terms in a post-Khomeini context and agree a peace deal. I do think that's what's going to happen. Iran cannot oppose countries such as Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia when they come together, as they have done, in a mutual defense pact. It's just too much for Iran to deal with.
Told you he's the best person on this topic, everybody. Majid Nawaz there, summing it up brilliantly and hopefully giving people reason to sleep better tonight rather than worse. And that's what I was wanting us to do, is to allay the fears of people in the UK that this is the start of World War III. I know that everybody at home in the UK is incredibly worried about this situation. And thank you, Majid. I really appreciate it. What fascinating insight, my friend. I will speak to you very soon. Goodbye. Right. I'm delighted to say that my panel are here waiting very patiently.
That was for GB News America with Bev Turner commenting on President Trump's strategy. Since then, of course, we've had updates. On March the 1st, it was reported on your screens now. President Trump told CBS in a phone call that he believes a diplomatic solution with Iran is, quote, easily remains possible, suggesting that strikes put immense pressure on Iran. Much easier now than it was a day ago, obviously, because they are getting beat up badly. Al Arabiya English reports US President Trump says Iran's new leadership wants to talk to him and that he has agreed, according to an interview with the Atlantic magazine. Of course, when those talks happen will come down to when these strikes cease and stop and calm down. But of course, you heard us in that clip talk about something that we've been mentioning through the course of this stream, and that is Iran's absurd response. We're going to now show you what Iran did and how it retaliated, how it responded, and why it's upset the region so much, and why the Western regressive left, in their demand that we all rally behind Iran now, is going to fall flat on its face because of what Iran did. Iran didn't just strike back at Israel, but also attacked the United Arab Emirates at the Dhafra air base. One died in Abu Dhabi from the falling debris of an intercepted missile. Now, keep in mind, the bases in the Sunni Muslim Arab world exist by sovereign consent of those countries. The Saudis have a country. They decide who gets to train and base their troops in their own country. Yes, if those bases had been permitted to be used by the Americans to attack Iran, Iran would have had a point. But the Saudis, as you heard us mention there on GB News America with Bev Turner, the Saudis had prohibited the Americans from using their base to strike at Iran. And yet Iran still decided to take revenge by dropping bombs on Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, the other great miscalculation here is you will not find many devout Sunni Muslims that will accept lying down their holy lands being bombed. bombing Saudi Arabia is guaranteed going to upset every single Sunni Muslim on the planet. Iran very much miscalculated, partially because they're not Sunni Muslims and they don't understand the internal psychology of that particular dynamic. They miscalculated grossly. But we're going to go through this list for you. This is everyone they bombed that had nothing to do with the Israeli-US strikes on Iran. The United Arab Emirates, a Dhafra Air Base, as we said, 1 dead in Abu Dhabi. Bahrain, they decided to bomb Bahrain. Qatar, they decided to bomb Qatar. Kuwait, they bombed the Kuwaiti International Airport. What did that have to do with any strikes on Iran? Jordan, they bombed the Muwaffaq al-Salti Air Base in Jordan, right? Okay, what were we counting? That's 5 so far, yeah? UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Jordan. 5 Sunni Muslim Arab countries so far, right? 5. Syria, they bombed the Suwaida Industrial Zone. The Suwaida Industrial Zone in Syria. According to the Syrian state news agency, SANA, 4 people were dead in southern Syria because of the Iranian bombing, right? 4 deaths, okay? 7, well, we've already heard it, Saudi Arabia. They bombed Riyadh. They bombed Saudi Arabia, right? And that's not just Riyadh. They also bombed the Prince Sultan Air Base in the east of the country. So they bombed 2 different locations in Saudi Arabia. 8, they bombed Iraq. As if that poor country hasn't seen enough bombs already, the Iranians bombed Iraq. In particular, they bombed Erbil. They bombed the US consulate in Erbil. Now, frankly, again, that's got nothing to do with the US and Israel bombing Iran. You don't just get to bomb US embassies in random neighboring countries. That's like them sending missiles to bomb the US embassy in London. We didn't attack Iran. You can't just throw a missile over to London. But they bombed Erbil in Iraq. All right, what are we on now? 8. And then 9. They bombed, after all of this, they then bombed famously neutral Oman. And they bombed the Duqm commercial port in Oman. 9 Sunni Muslim Arab countries that the Iranians bombed after being bombed by none of them. And then the Western regressive left tell everybody to rally behind Iran. Now that's the 9, and add to that the 10th, which is the country I'm speaking from right now. The Iranians decided, despite the weakness shown by the Prime Minister Keir Starmer here in the United Kingdom, and his complete misunderstanding of the dynamics of geopolitics in the world at this current moment, and his divorce from understanding anything President Trump is up to. Under Keir Starmer, Britain, despite all of that, prohibited America from using any of its bases to strike Iran, and the Iranian theocrats still decided it was okay to bomb a British base in Cyprus for no reason. That's 10 now, 9 Sunni Muslim Arab countries and the UK. And the Western regressive left, with its white savior complex, wants us to rally behind Iran as somehow the hero of resistance and anti-colonialism. It is absurd. So we've said there, the overt justification is that Iran targeted these countries that were hosting US troops in their military bases. But the strategic aim, of course, that doesn't stand up because they targeted airports, hotels in Dubai, the Kuwaiti International Airport, commercial ports in Oman. It's all lies. They are doing something else. And this is what we said they were doing. The strategic aim is that by expanding the theater of war to include its regional Arab Muslim neighbors, Iran's theocrats, with little to lose if they're fighting for their own survival, were seeking instead to escalate the cost of the conflict. That's what they were seeking to do. This action seeks to force the US to choose between a regime in flames with the prospects of a wider war or return to negotiations with Iran. Iran is goading escalation by calculating that if it is forced to fight, then it stands a better chance of survival if other countries, such as Russia and China, are dragged into the war. We've said this on the first day of the conflict. This is a statement from the first day, right? This is similar to Israel's Samson option. If you force a regime to fight for its existential survival, then it may seek to impose this cost onto you too. Causing regional chaos and provoking all-out war is still seen as better than a total loss. Israel has that option too. It's called the Samson option. But Iran clearly has the same policy. And we've written here, Netanyahu plays a similar game. This is why President Trump is in a very difficult position. Managing this is incredibly difficult, but necessary for America. Now, after Iran struck us and all of our allies, that had nothing to do with the US-Israeli strike on Iran, the very much lame duck Prime Minister of Britain, Keir Starmer, had this to say. We're just going to play it for you.
I spoke to you about the situation in the Gulf and explained that the United Kingdom was not involved in the strikes on Iran. That remains the case. Over the last 2 days, Iran has launched sustained attacks across the region at countries who did not attack them. They've hit airports and hotels where British citizens are staying. This is clearly a dangerous situation. We have at least 200,000 British citizens in the region, residents, families on holiday, and those in transit. I ask all our people in the region to please register your presence and follow Foreign Office travel advice. I know this is a deeply worrying time, and we will continue to do all we can to support you. Our armed forces, who are located across the region, are also being put at risk by Iran's actions. Yesterday, Iran hit a military base in Bahrain, narrowly missing British personnel. The death of the supreme leader will not stop Iran from launching these strikes. Their approach is becoming even more reckless and more dangerous to civilians. Our decision that the UK would not be involved with the strikes on Iran was deliberate, not least because we believe that the best way forward for the region and for the world is a negotiated settlement, one in which Iran agrees to give up any aspirations to develop a nuclear weapon. But Iran is striking British interests nonetheless, and putting British people at huge risk, along with our allies across the region. That is the situation we face today. Our partners in the Gulf have asked us to do more to defend them, and it is my duty to protect British lives. We have British jets in the air as part of coordinated defensive operations, which have already successfully intercepted Iranian strikes. But the only way to stop the threat is to destroy the missiles at source, in their storage depots, or the launchers which are used to fire the missiles. The United States has requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose. We have taken the decision to accept this request, to prevent Iran firing missiles across the region, killing innocent civilians, putting British lives at risk, and hitting countries that have not been involved. The basis of our decision is the collective self-defense of long-standing friends and allies and protecting British lives. That is in accordance with international law, and we are publishing a summary of our legal advice. We are not joining these strikes, but we will continue with our defensive actions in the region. And we will also bring experts from Ukraine together with our own experts to help Gulf partners shoot down Iranian drones attacking them. I want to be very clear We all remember the mistakes of Iraq, and we have learned those lessons. We were not involved in the initial strikes on Iran, and we will not join offensive action now. But Iran is pursuing a scorched earth strategy. So we are supporting the collective self-defense of our allies and our people in the region. Because that is our duty to the British people. It is the best way to eliminate the urgent threat and prevent the situation spiraling further. This is the British government protecting British interests and British lives.
That incredibly weak statement by Starmer is confusing, and we're going to get to why in a bit, but our immediate reaction to that is on your screens now. We said, too little, too late, Keir Starmer. You're a lame duck prime minister who was left out of the national security loop because you've been compromised by paedophiles. The sooner we are rid of you, the better. After this statement was made, we were invited onto GB News last night, GB News Britain. What you saw just now was GB News America with Bev Turner. Last night was GB News Britain with Michelle Dewberry, prime time again. The GB News America presentation was about Trump's strategy. Last night's in GB News Britain was about Starmer, and this is what we had to say. We were on there with Labour MP Barry Gardiner, who was defending Starmer's position that you just saw, and we're going to play for you the debate we had with him about Keir Starmer's weakness. Take a look at this.
And of course, he was right to pay tribute to our armed forces, and he said in that statement that we owe it to our armed forces personnel that when we put them in harm's way, they have the right to know that it is in pursuit of a lawful purpose. And I think that's right. Sending young men and women into conflict is not something that any government should do lightly, and they should not do it unless they are clear that what they're asking them to do is lawful. Now, I think there is a concern, I have a concern, with the way in which he, in his published broadcast statement, talked about a defensive strike being allowed from UK bases. And he said that we didn't participate in the initial attack, but we were prepared to have the US use our bases for a defensive strike. Well, I'm afraid words have meaning in the English language, and defensive strike is actually two antonyms. It's a contradiction in terms, a defensive strike.
Why? Why?
Because what you do have is you have something called a preemptive strike, but in any language, a preemptive strike is actually an attack. It's an attack to stop an attack coming from the other direction, but it is an attack, and it's that initial use of force. So I think there was a confusion in the position that the Prime Minister adopted, both saying that we won't actually engage in the initial attack, and then saying that we will allow our bases to be used for a defensive strike.
Majid?
Well, I think a response would have been nice. I mean, as is the case, our own base has been attacked by the Iranians, and the Iranians seem to be attacking whoever they can get their hands on in the region, us in Cyprus, and clearly their strategy is they're seeking to expand this war and bring everybody else into it in the hopes that the wider the conflict, the more of a chance that they have to survive. If they can drag the Russians and the Chinese in, they get the big boys on their side, perhaps their regime doesn't collapse. That's probably what they're up to. But look, frankly, if they've attacked our own sovereign base, then there does need to be some form of response. And just watching Keir Starmer and the way in which he presented, both before our own and our allies were attacked and after they were attacked, it looks incredibly weak, Barry. You've got to admit that.
No, I think the country. I don't think it looks weak, but I take your point about
there's no
after
response.
We have been attacked.
What do you think we should do?
There was one drone that attacked the Akrotiri base.
Yeah.
And the Akrotiri base was not being used. But
hold on, Barry. Two more were en route to and about to hit that same base and were shot down by Cypriot defensive missiles, not our own. So I'm sorry, that doesn't hold water.
They were shot down going over, actually, so that's not the point. But what I was saying here is that actually the decision that Starmer had made to allow defensive strikes from British bases, I think, was taken before those strikes happened. Now, it's convenient, in a sense, for him that subsequently that base was attacked in that way, and therefore you can say, well, all the more reason. But at that point, you do say, well, what is the difference between saying that you have a defensive posture and an attacking posture?
Sorry, this sounds very nice, right? But what do you think, as somebody that's obviously a representative of our government, led by Keir Starmer, what should we do now that our base has been attacked by the Iranians?
I think we have a legitimate interest in self-defense, and if we are under immediate threat, we have the right to defend ourselves, and that would include by attacking Iran and joining.
So does this require a reply? If somebody lobs a bomb over at us, do we just sit there and do nothing?
No, we don't sit there and do nothing, and that's not what I've said. I've said that we have, under international law, we do have the right to self-defense.
What does that mean? What do we do?
What it means
So
is...
let's just cut to the chase. Do you think that the UK should be now striking back at Iran?
I think we should be trying to stay as far out of this as possible, because I believe that the whole operation was an illegal operation. I think what's happened is that the Americans have then ensured that there is a response. Iran was attacked by the Americans. There was a response from the...
Hang on. There
was a response from Iran, which encapsulated all the countries in the region, including an airbase of ours, which is in the region. And at that point, one has to say that the Americans have precipitated that response.
And there you have it, folks. An incredibly weak line that has no clear answer as to what should be done after our base was attacked by the Iranians, when we had nothing to do with that first attack on the Iranians by the Americans and the Israelis. The government is paralyzed. It appears very evidently paralyzed on this topic. And we later on in that program concluded our remarks by saying Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, is a lame duck Prime Minister. Now, on the issue of Iran and attacking the region, we just want to make it very clear so that there is no doubt in anyone's mind that this conflict didn't just begin yesterday. Iran has history and form in doing this. We're going to blow this up on your screens for you. This is a very brief historic summary. Western anti-war pundits who defend the Shia Islamist theocracy in Iran are as a bastion of anti-colonial resistance, are blind to Iran's history of sectarian regional colonialism. Point one, Iran supported the neocon invasion of Iraq. Did you know that, by the way? We're about to play you a video demonstrating it. Iran supported the neocon invasion of Iraq. Point two, Iran supported the neocon invasion of Afghanistan. Did you know that? Western white savior complex regressive left. Point three, Iran sustained the generational sectarian occupation and destruction of Syria under the brutal Assad family's Alawite dynasty. The Alawites are a sect within the Shiite sect. And Syria, of course, is overwhelmingly Sunni Muslim. 4. Iran embarked on colonial sectarian proxy militia building in Lebanon via Hezbollah, in Iraq via Kataib Ansaru Hezbollah, and in Yemen via the Houthis, destabilizing the entire region. Like most revolutionary states, the Iranian theocracy only survives by maintaining the dialectic of conflict. Exporting the revolution is colonialism, just under a different name. Sunni Arab Muslims have realized that the world is more complex than this childlike, simplistic narrative of Israel versus everybody else, that Iran and the Western anti-war crowd hides its colonialism behind. Iran's absurd reaction to US and Israeli strikes by attacking Sunni Arab Gulf countries only highlights this fact further. The Iranian theocracy stands isolated. Now, in regards to Iran supporting the neocon invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, this video with the historic leaders of Iran saying as much, we're just going to play for you, just so there's little room left for doubt as to Iran's regional colonialism.
در عراق و افغانستان به استقرار دموکراسی داشتند که بیشترین همکاری ها در افغانستان و در عراق
طالبان دشمن ماست آمریکا هم احساس می‌کرد طالبان دشمن ما بیایم تجربه افغانستان رو در مورد عراق را تکرار بکنیم
برای چی ما رو بردن جزء محور شراره ما که کمک کرده بودیم به سرنگونی صدام بعد گفتن آقا ما می‌خوایم طالبان رو در عراق در سرنگون کنیم دوباره کمکشون کردیم
اگر سقوط صدام اشتراک منافع ایران و امریکا نبود بالاخره که منجر به برخی یا نوعی همکاری ها انجام
In case of Afghanistan, Iran did everything to cooperate with America in order to topple the Taliban.
2001, war on terror, when again the US invited Iran to cooperate. It was impossible without Revolutionary Guard cooperation.
بس افغانستان ایران کمک کرد به آمریکایی‌ها یعنی کمک ایرانی‌ها نبود در افغانستان ما در افغانستان مشکل پیدا می‌کردیم بعد از
ببینید من فکر کنم که اتفاقا بیشترین ارتباطی که ایران در خلال حالا همین چند دهه گذشته داشته ارتباط با آمریکا داشته شما آیا میتونید کتمان کنید که ایران و امریکا وقتی که به اصطلاح در مورد آزادسازی افغانستان همکاری مگر همکاری ایران و آمریکا در عراق نبود که اصلا شیعه رو در عراق به عنوان یکی از
And there you have it, folks. From the horse's mouth, Iran was involved in decades and decades of regional colonialism, encouraging the US neoconservatives, facilitating their invasion of Afghanistan, facilitating their invasion of Iraq, of course, occupying Syria and building out their militia through the region, including in Lebanon, now in Iraq, and, of course, in Yemen. So much for being anti-colonial. We've said in reaction to this, the entire world is unifying against the Islamist theocracy in Iran. Sunni Muslims will be at the forefront. The religious clerics in Tehran have overplayed their hand. Keep watching. In fact, some of the Sunni Muslim countries have already started responding. Again, very interesting for the Western anti-colonial left. Even the Palestinian Authority has come out and condemned Iran. You can see it there. We've said significant, considering their beef with Israel. Pakistan and others have also done likewise. The world has changed since Islamism's peak in the 90s. Iran's calculated escalation has backfired. And that's in response to the Spectator Index reporting there in the box at the bottom. Breaking. Palestinian Authority condemns Iranian attacks on Arab countries. Oh dear. Not very convenient for the Western regressive left, is it? Even the Palestinian Authority condemned Iran for their attacks on Arab Muslim countries. What did you expect? The Palestinians themselves are Sunni Muslim Arabs. But these are very inconvenient facts for the Western regressive left. Here is the Prime Minister of Pakistan also saying the same. Just read it for you. He said, I spoke with my dear brother, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed ibn Salman, this evening to express Pakistan's strong condemnation of the dangerous regional escalation following the Israeli attack on Iran and subsequent attacks in the Gulf region. Pakistan stands in full solidarity with Saudi Arabia and our brotherly Gulf countries in this perilous time. We remain ready to play a constructive role for peace and pray that the blessings of Ramadan bring calm and stability to our region. That's the Prime Minister of Pakistan siding with Saudi Arabia, not with Iran. Here is Turkey by the Spectator Index. Turkey's President Erdogan says Iran's drone and missile attacks against Gulf countries are unacceptable. Here is Syria, as reported by The Cradle. Syria, under the leadership of Ahmed al-Shara, condemns Iran, not the US and Israel, over the regional escalation, denouncing Tehran's retaliation against US bases while ignoring US-Israeli strikes. Foreign Minister Asad al-Shaybani conveyed messages of solidarity to the Saudi and Emirati officials. Furthermore, Saudi Arabia itself, as reported by the New York Post, Saudi Arabia condemns Iran's attacks on Gulf nations and offers all of its capabilities in the fight against, not Israel, against Tehran, the capital of Iran. And here, Lebanon's Prime Minister, according to the Spectator Index on your screens now, Lebanon's Prime Minister, Nawaf al-Salam, condemns Hezbollah and their attacks on Israel, calls it irresponsible. And then, of course, the historic decision by Lebanon, as reported by Al Arabiya, English and others on your screens now, the Lebanese government has imposed a, quote, immediate ban on Hezbollah's military and security activities and called on the group to hand over its weapons to the state. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam announces. Remember, that's the group, Hezbollah, the Iranian terrorist proxy militia in a different country, in Lebanon. All right? Funded and run and set up by the Iranians in a third country. Finally, the Lebanese have been able to ban them. Hezbollah have been banned here in the UK as a terrorist organization for a few years now. That's a groundbreaking decision made in Lebanon to now ban that Iranian proxy as well. And here again, by the cradle, the US, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE condemn Iran missile and drone strikes across the region. They say the strikes endangered civilians and violated sovereignty. They reaffirm the right to self-defense and praise coordinated air and missile defenses. There is the joint statement they've made. All of this will be published, as usual, in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch. And we've concluded that by saying this, the following, which is on your screens now. The Iranian theocracy's calculated escalation that sought to widen the war by attacking its Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors badly misfired. Do not fall for the gaslighting. All right? This is in particular now addressed to you white savior complex Western regressive leftists. You are gaslighters. Do not fall for the gaslighting. Iran attacked the Arabs and the UK, despite these countries not permitting the US to use their bases for their initial strikes. Saudi Arabia's challenge will be to respond in a manageable way, but that can be done and should be. The land of Al-Haramain, the two holy mosques, being attacked is a matter not to be tolerated, ever. And this is in response to Disclosed TV revealing, this is from just an hour ago, senior Israeli officials believe that Saudi Arabia will attack Iran soon. Well, of course, they would be responding to Iran attacking them. In other words, defending themselves. And on the gaslighting, we've said it again here, just to make the point very clear. Gaslight. Those bases were not used because somebody said, don't most, if not all of those Sunni neighbor countries host US bases? We've said gaslight. Those bases were not used to attack Iran in the initial strike, and yet Iran still attacked her Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors and the UK. Hosting foreign bases is a sovereign decision, nothing to do with anyone else, unless they're used to attack them. The mainstream Western, quote, anti-war left is acting as a front for the Iranian theocracy's regional colonial aggression. Sunni Muslim Arabs have their own agency and shall use it. That in particular goes out to all of those followers of people like Mr. George Galloway, who are unable to comprehend that Sunni Muslim Arabs may well have their own agency and aren't acting just because Israel also dislikes Iran, but actually defending themselves because the Iranian theocracy decided to attack them. And we'll conclude with this last clip from GB News last night on the Michelle Dewberry show. That's GB News Britain. And we've said that this is how it's going to end. We've postulated that a deal will be made, and we're just going to play it for you.
Lessons from Iraq. We have learned lessons from interventions generally abroad. President Trump tends not to intervene in foreign countries unless he has a plan in advance, and I call it strategic intervention. If we look at what happened in Venezuela, it's very clear that there was a plan involved. Maduro was taken captive, and it is very clear that there was a deal made with the remnants of the regime on the inside so they could take over from him after he was captured. If you go to before that as well, in Syria, the same thing happened. The Russian Navy even voluntarily withdrew, abandoning Assad to the point where he had to flee to Russia, and then there was a transition. Now, in neither of those two cases, but especially in the Venezuela case,
It's very clear, learn the lessons of Iraq, and they didn't just disband the entire old regime. So though we have in Iran a scenario where the entire leadership has effectively been decapitated, I don't think that the American plan would be to then disband the entire regime, as was done in Iraq, which led to that chaos and the vacuum into which came ISIS. I don't think that is their plan. It seems to me that they would have had some form of deal made on the inside with whoever's going to take over, probably second line command and control, and somebody will ascend in that regime.
I thought you said he'd killed the second and third.
Yeah, but somebody will ascend, and they'll end up making a deal with the Americans, and that will keep happening until somebody is there willing to make a deal. Frankly, there needs to be a deal, and that's probably how it's going to end.
So that's how we think it's going to end. There will be a deal made eventually. The Iranians will keep propping up leaders, refusing to make a deal. Those leaders will be killed until finally a leader decides they don't want to be killed, and they'll make a deal with the Americans. And that is pretty much concludes our show today. We ask all of our listeners to go over to Radical Media on majidnawaz.substack.com, subscribe to get the written version of this stream in the form of the Radical Dispatch that will be published tomorrow, and the podcast version of this stream for premium subscribers will be available there too, as well as paywalled content. All of the receipts for everything we've discussed today will be in that written dispatch, some of it behind the paywall, so that the premium members get access to the complete package, as well as to the Warrior Creed podcast version of this stream as well. Premium subscribers also get extra content, such as the long-form Radical podcast in which we interview guests. Our recent one, The Case for American Power, with a US think tank commentator, Shadi Hamid, and his latest book by that name, The Case for American Power, was published by Radical Media in the long-form Radical podcast for all of our premium subscribers. Well, to listen to that conversation, a roughly hour, 20-minute long-form interview with some that really has been at the forefront of liberal foreign policy thinking, coming and hailing as he does from the Brookings trajectory, a Washington Post columnist. It was really an interesting conversation in which I defended Trump's foreign policy decisions. He, of course, coming from the liberal progressive tradition, wasn't really disagreeing insofar as he was discussing, because some of the stuff it appeared as if he had not really heard before. Really interesting conversation. Those long form podcasts are available on Radical Media for all of our premium subscribers. We ask all of you who do subscribe to become paying premium subscribers, because without your support, we cannot continue this work. Until next time, though, you've been listening to The Radical here for the Warrior Creed live stream, and we will be back at the usual time next week.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Good service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.